How y'all doing? For this review, I'm going to cover two books in a series that could have been greater, but I'll explain why it didn't in a little bit. I got to be aware of this through this tabletop role-playing game, Black Sword Hack Ultimate Chaos Edition. It's a very thin main rule book that is, basically, if you want to play your role-playing games under the tradition of Conan, Elric, Baffron Grey Mouser, Kari Wagner's Kane, and such, this game was modeled with those books in mind in order to form the world that you could possibly play in. Now, I'm not going to review this book here. There are plenty of videos out there to show you what this game is like and how it plays, even by people who played it. So we're not going to get into that. But if you want, I can link it down to where it's from. It's from the Merry Mushman, and you can order it. You'll have to order it overseas, or maybe drive through RPG, what have you. But again, I digress. There's a bibliography that I've suggested reading, and one of them I have is picked up is this Raum by Carl Sherrell, or maybe it's Sherrell. I'm not certain, but the point is, this is the book they suggested. But there's a sequel to this that's not in Black Sword Hack. The sequel is the Skraeling. So let's look into these and see what that's about. Starting with the first book, of course, we started with a wizard who tries to summon a demon from hell to perform a task, particularly Astaroth. Now, after his summonings, he gets something different. What comes in through the summonings is a very tall, powerful being, wearing very darkened armor, big sword, shield. His features, his features are kind of monstrous, not exactly human, very tall, very powerful muscle, talons for hands, fangs for teeth, red eyes. This is not Astaroth, but someone else that came in his steed, underneath Astaroth. His name is Raum, an earl from hell. Now, you were to ask him, what his capabilities are, and Raum, explains, well, I could see the past and future, except my own, I can cause earthquakes and, and crush, landscapes and cities. He can also make two people or a group, causes them to love. Odd as that is pointed out, but it comes in handy here. And if you understand the nature of where demons come from, you can see where this was an ability to pass. Okay, so Jord, the wizard, I'm assuming the pronunciation is Scandinavian, J-O-R-D. He wants Raum to do a task for him, to go over this land and capture the Queen Gudrun. Because he wants her for himself, beautiful woman and everything. Now Raum, even though he's under no condition to negotiate, wants Jord to do something for him in return. Jord agrees. So Raum goes out and with a small force, and he wreaks havoc to the castle. He captures the queen and her son, Prince Jal, or Prince Yal, J-A-L. I'm assuming again Scandinavian pronunciation based on where it was located. And accompanied by another man named Herrick, they return to the wizard to complete his task. Now, upon going back to Jord, he's having a little celebration with the queen at his side, now his, and so forth. Long story short, the prince had an opportunity to kill the wizard, and now Raum, free from the wizard, and he has his own task to accomplish, his own personal thing that he wanted Jord to help him out with. But before that, he's going to return the queen and the prince back to where they were. But because he started to wreak havoc first, of the havoc he wreaked trying to capture the two in the first place, they tried to attack him, to avenge what he's done. He escapes along with Herrick, who accompanied Raum to capture the queen. And so after that, he gets back at them by destroying the landscape that blocks a waterway, causing the land, to flood. So now the queen, the prince, and the people are now in exodus because of the damage that Raum did. Raum is now going to do what he planned to do, when he was summoned. So what is Raum's goal? To ascend beyond his position as a damned being from hell. So, and his plan was to come to Earth and seek out Merlin, who's sleeping in Camelot. So he gets help from the Vikings, who make a journey to Camelot, and going to King Arthur's court and having an event there. He meets a few knights, but eventually, by conversing with the three elven ladies, like Morgana Le Fay and Vivian, who falls in love with Raum, and Raum loves her back, he eventually finds Merlin, who is asleep. And by seeking his advice, hopefully his advice would help him to ascend higher beyond, hell, and to seek a brighter state of being, so to speak. Now, here's the thing: he gets his advice, but it comes with some caveats. The longer he stays on Earth achieving his goal, he starts to slowly lose the powers that he has. Not drastically, but very, very slowly. He'll still be formidable in many ways. But also, if he dies on Earth, his soul goes back to the Nether Realm, where he'll be severely punished by Astaroth and Lucifer. Throughout the book, Astaroth shows up in in areas where he's by himself through flame and stuff like that, taunting him and all of that of how he's going to achieve this, and laughs in his face about that. But Raum goes ahead with it anyway. So, with his new advice on how to achieve his goal, he still has some issues here. Prince Jarl, is still trying to hunt him down, and there's also the Vikings that are going to wreak havoc across, Camelot and all that. So that's the ending of the story, and how Raum's going to resolve this with, and survive, and hopefully still achieve, hopefully in his road to a higher state of being. So that's going to be basically right down the first book. Now, Raum here does end on a cliffhanger after all his adventures there. You see, the woman that he falls in love with, Vivian, is captured by a Norseman and is taken to Iceland. He finds this out through Astaroth. Again, taunting him about, you're never going to achieve your goals and all that sort of thing. You know what demons do. But Raum is going on a quest to rescue her. Now, that's where we come to the second book, Skraeling. Raum goes to Iceland and he confronts the king and the council there, about the Norsemen who captured Vivian. And he says, well, he's not here. He went out to the main continent. And so Raum agrees to join him on an expedition because they have a settlement there that will help raise goods and such to after the season to build up goods and come back to Iceland to sell and all that and make some money. Now, the king is not a weak man, and his wife, Lady Freydis, is a very devious individual. She's basically the main opponent upon this. She tries to do whatever she can to, get Raum's ship, because, it's a good vessel for her to use. She tries to have Raum assassinated. It fails. She, does all these things. Tries to, sabotage, Raum and his group, whatever they can to get for her own ends. Raum is not alone in this. He does have a small group with him. One was Wolfgar, who was a Norseman he met in the first book of Raum. He meets Nada the Witch. He meets Orm Holfson, who is a man living in Iceland who was kind of down on his luck there, and he's taken an opportunity to build him up in this settlement here. And then there's Brother Brian, who's a Christian monk, who it's his Christian duty to go up against Raum and whatever he's doing. So he tags along here. And you get to see more character growth of these companions here. Raum has taken the opportunity to do this just so he can get into the mainland and rescue Vivian. So as they reach the settlement, he goes off on his own. He has to deal with the natives there, and eventually, to hopefully find the group that has, have her captured. And it's, I'm not going to get too much in detail of that, but so there you go. That's the two books of Carl Sherrell's Raum books. There could have been more, and I'll explain a little bit here shortly. But first, let me talk about the art of the first book. The illustration of the book Raum was done by the late, great Stephen Fabian. He passed away in May 2025, a year before I made this video. I reviewed a couple other books with his illustrations in it. Illustrated Camps, Dragon of the Ishtar, Gate, and We Are All Legends by Daryl Schweitzer. And he does a wonderful job in this book just the same. He takes what is our world and gives a feel of the fantasy and works that we see in movies like Excalibur or Dragon Slayer. What can I say? Top notch as always. Of course, those illustrations only show up in the first book of Raum, who did the cover and several interior art pieces inside. Unfortunately for the sequel to Skraeling, Stephen Fabian did not illustrate the cover or the illustrations inside. And by that, it's done by, Harry Quinn. He did the cover and one illustration, which is this. It's not bad. It's just not Stephen Fabian. Which I do feel that, again, if you're just reading the theater of your mind, don't care about illustrations, no big deal. But it does feel less like a, while this set in a fantasy version of our world, this one feels less fantasy relative to that. I mean, we still have Raum with his abilities, and Astaroth shows up here and there. The witch, there's a character and all that, but it doesn't feel like the same world as the first one. It's like you go to a more fantasy mythological version of Europe, and then you go to Americas, and it feels less so. I think if they would have added some elements, feel like it's still the same mythic world of Earth, could have been better. But that's not saying it's bad. You can enjoy it as it is. But it does make me kind of curious. When Black Sword Hack recommended the first book, it didn't mention the second one. And again, it doesn't feel like a very sword and sorcerer heroic fantasy type of story. It's more it's a continuous adventures of Raum, who you already got to know about in the first book, and that was enough to keep you going. Unfortunately, we have despite all that, the author created this book in '77. This one was published in '87, and the author died in '90. So we are in that situation where we have a starting work that could have had more to it. We could have seen Raum evolved more and more into what he was trying to accomplish by ascending beyond hell and hopefully building himself up in our world and maybe ascend even to a more pure state, instead of a demon from another world. The idea is fascinating. I understand why it was chosen by this, because that's a concept that can work out. But we won't be able to see that anymore, and it's not very well known. I mean, something like this may feel like normal fare, but conceptual-wise, of a demon trying to ascend beyond his position. It's explained in the first book that Raum has found out that Lucifer has withheld information such as this to the lesser demons. In his conversation with Merlin, he says there's a reason why, because if many of your kind in hell find out that they can ascend beyond, because they believe that they were told by Lucifer and all that their place in hell is permanent. They cannot, go beyond that. If there was a way out of it, they would rebel against Lucifer. So Lucifer withheld that information. That's another, problem that they have with Raum on Earth. If he gets him doing this may send an example to others. That they can go beyond as well. So with that, it's just an interesting dynamic I find with this series. So there you go. That's Raum and Skraeling by Carl Sherrell. If you find these two, give it a shot. If anything, you'd be sad that there's no more stories about his evolution, but it's good inspiration if you like the heroic fantasy on a different twist. With every other sword and sorcery character, they may have mythical qualities about them, or they may be ordinary humans, but they're still something that was born in a mortal realm, where Raum is a demon, one of the fallen, who's trying to go beyond that. That's an interesting twist. And maybe you could come up with a new series that will, succeed where this one did not, just due to unfortunate case of death by the author. So with that said, that is again Raum and Skraeling by Carl Sherrell. Thank you all for watching. You have a nice day.